Hello, darlings, and welcome to a very special crossover episode of the podcast. Joining me today is Adelia Kirchner. She's a wonderful woman and host of the Subtle Rampage podcast. Now, we have pretty different views of the world. I'm more liberal and she's more conservative, leading us to have very different opinions on things like religion, trans people, and COVID. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to understand each other. And to that end, I think we had a very pleasant discussion. So join us as we defend the indefensible. Well then, I guess we can start. So the first thing I'm really interested in is just a little bit about you, of like who are you?
Yeah, for sure. Well, my name is Adelia. A little bit of background. I am currently living in Tennessee in the United States. I write for a conservative publication here called the Tennessee Conservative. So I do that in the sort of political realm. And then I also called Subtle Rampage, and I also talk about politics on there in life. But yeah.
Let's start a little bit further back. Obviously, I'm interested in now like upbringing, like childhood. I want to know like what got you to this current place in life. Like maybe starting at like what kind of like how you grew up.
Well, a lot got me to this point in life. A lot. I feel like my life story isn't like super clean, super straightforward. I feel like that's the case for a lot of people, so I'm not special on that front. But I always feel like when I tell people about like my life or like what brought me to this point, I always leave something out and it feels so dishonest, but it's always unintentional. I was born in Florida. And when I was like a baby and a toddler, I think my parents moved around with me a little bit. I don't really remember that. I think I lived in Wisconsin for a few months. I don't know. Uh, but then I lived in Tennessee until I was 13 and moved back to Florida. And then I spent high school in Texas, and now I'm back in Tennessee. I grew up homeschooled, so it wasn't like I was constantly switching schools or anything like that, but it was still a major adjustment because I kind of moved back and forth at some of those crucial ages. So, it's moving to new cities, trying to make new friends. It's not exactly the easiest, but I did it. I survived. I grew up Christian, but not necessarily affiliated with a specific denomination, I guess. It's not like I grew up Baptist or I grew up Methodist or anything like that. As a kid, my parents, we found churches that worked for our family, that had a good community of people. It wasn't necessarily like, oh, it has to be this specific denomination, because I feel like it can get a little bit tribal like that anyways.
Hmm.
But uh
Were you
yeah.
home? Sorry, yeah, you can continue
No,
if
go
you.
ahead.
Were you homeschooled your entire like upbringing like through like high school? Like is that?
Yeah, so I'm the oldest of seven children.
Alright.
And my mom has homeschooled all of us. She's like a superwoman on that front. I applaud it. It's a big job. It's a lot of work to spend that much time like planning out and educating, and then also doing all the things that everybody else does when your kids are at home. Yeah, so I've been homeschooled my entire life. I never went to public school or private school. A couple of my siblings spent a year or two in school during more stressful times in life when, there were other things that needed tending to, and it just kind of all panned out that way. But yeah, I was homeschooled until I started doing dual credit at the local community college when I was 16. And then I started doing dual credit at a university campus that was nearby, and that was really a big difference between community and university. But yeah, so I was homeschooled till college.
Okay. And so how do you feel like that affected you, like going into like college? Like, do you feel like you were prepared, or do you feel like I don't
Yeah,
know? Yes, or just from my mind, because I've been primarily public schooled. It was only like the very first couple, like till like second grade or something that I was homeschooled. So like it feels like that would be a very big jump of going from like completely like homeschooled to suddenly being.
yeah, no, this is definitely something that people an amount. But I feel like I was totally prepared for it. Um, to be fair, I've always been somebody who like loves school I always wanted to go to college. It was always something that I was preparing myself for. And because my mom knew it was something that I wanted to do with my future, she was very, coming alongside of me, making sure that we knew what to expect and what I needed to do to prepare for that and getting all the right coursework done and all that stuff. So, um, and then as far as like the social aspect of things, like, or the schedule aspect of things and it being overwhelming or anything like that, um, I honestly think being able to like manage my own schedule as a homeschool student, like once you get older, you can do that for yourself. I think that actually helped me with having to manage my own time in university type courses. That is really what you're doing. Like, the professor is not keeping track of things for you. They say, here's the syllabus. I might remind you, I might not, but you're gonna have to figure it out on your own. So I think that I was fully prepared. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't homeschool students out there who have a different experience, but I think for myself and a lot of my homeschooling counterparts that I've still kept in contact with over the years, and like my best friend, she was homeschooled, like we all agree that fully prepared for college.
Okay, interesting. Wait, what did you study in college?
Well, okay, so when I was a kid, I read this book series. It's called the Alice series. Phyllis Reynolds Naylor with it, and the main character in those books goes to school for psychology to become a school counselor. And
Okay.
so that was what I wanted to do when I first enrolled in university. And then I took a psychology class. And I was like, I don't know about this. And I was already enrolled as a double major in psychology and English because I love writing. I like analyzing literature, analyzing film, that type of stuff. It's very interesting to me. And so I just changed my psychology major to a government major because I was like, I think that I have an interest in the social sciences. I do have an interest in like understanding how people interact with each other and stuff. Um, but I was like, I graduated high school in 2020, so that's when I was kind of like going off to college officially. And I was like, I think how the US government works is going to be more at this point because at least then I can kind of understand how these decisions are being made. Like, and then I can go from there and decide how I feel about people's like reactions and people's like correspondence with each other, I was like, I don't need to know more about the human brain quite yet. This is a little overwhelming.
Okay, I see, I see. So, I guess back a little bit to the homeschooling part. What do you think, like, people like, what do you think are some big misconceptions about homeschooling? Or maybe the advantages versus disadvantages of going to homeschooling versus, like, public schooling?
I think as far as like what people get wrong about homeschooling is, I mean, obviously it differs. People have their different perceptions, but I think one of the things that I get a lot in conversation, and that I know my parents have gotten a lot in conversation for their decision to homeschool us, is the whole idea of like they won't be socialized. How will they learn to interact with people? I feel like a lot of people have done a pretty good job of debunking that at this point because it's like, um, we do still talk to people, we still go places. It's we still have friends. So I don't know. I feel like that's one of the bigger assumptions is like how are you going to be equipped with the real world, so to speak? And I think it's pretty simple. Like as long as you're not keeping your kids in the house all day and like not doing normal life things, then they're gonna learn how to do normal life things. I guess. And what was the second part you brought up? You said
So I guess maybe the comparing and contrasting like homeschool versus public school. Like, do you think there's benefits to one versus the other, or like drawbacks to one versus the other?
yeah. Well, I think definitely. I think not every parent has the desire to homeschool, and I think that if somebody who doesn't have the desire to homeschool their child attempts to homeschool child, it's not going to really benefit either the parent or the child. Because I've seen it happen. I had friends as like in middle school and high school whose parents pulled them out of public school because they were experiencing bullying or they weren't doing well in certain areas of their studies or whatever it was. They pulled them out specifically for that reason. They didn't pull them out because they wanted to homeschool them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
And within a year, they were back in public school because all my parent did was throw papers with math problems at me and go to work.
Yeah.
So, I think that, it's not for everybody, but I personally think that if you have the heart for homeschooling, you have the heart to spend time with your kids and spend time educating your kids, then I fully recommend it. I think it is a very good way to do things. However, I know that there are plenty of situations in which it's not going to benefit the
Yeah.
family. So,
Yeah, I feel like when I'm imagining like arguments against it, I feel like a big one that would probably come up is like the competency of parents for teaching things that are at a higher level, because like most like grade school things like probably could be taught by most people, but once you get into like pre-calculus or like psychology or like human biology or things like that that are can be taught at the higher end of like high school and stuff, I feel like that might be where people have concerns of like, could a parent teach that if they're not like actually specialized in that area?
yeah, I think a lot of parents have this fear of homeschooling high school, and I don't blame them because it is like, I'm not a math brained person and I plan on homeschooling my kids. And so it's like, if I hadn't grown up homeschooling, if I hadn't had experience in the homeschooling community, that is one of the big questions that I would have. Okay, well, I'm supposed to teach my kid how am I going to efficiently teach them math because I don't even know what I'm doing. So I totally understand those questions, but I guess the way that I look at it, at least here in the US, is that there are so many resources now. It might not have been the case like, I don't know, 2 decades, 3 decades ago. I think resources for homeschoolers have expanded tremendously, but at this point, there's just a lot of different ways that you can approach that. I mean, for me, um, I took my high school algebra classes through a homeschool tutorial. So it was a math tutor who came in and taught us algebra. And then, I took college on and I was totally prepared for it. So, but that was something that we outsourced. I think that there's plenty of online classes, there are homeschool tutorials, there are homeschool co-ops. There's a lot of things like that you can do. There's science labs where you go and, you spend a whole day doing all your biology dissections and experiments and all this stuff, or a whole weekend, or, maybe it spans throughout the school year or whatever, and you get all that part done and you do the rest at home. Like, there's a lot of different ways to approach homeschooling high school. Has to necessarily know everything.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Why homeschool, I guess, is still a kind of a big question of like, why not just send them to public school? Like, why would someone want to homeschool rather than having a more standardized?
Yeah, for sure. My Speaking from my parents' experience and why they chose to homeschool, my mom grew up in a very like rocky situation with family, grew up in a very rocky situation with school. They moved around a lot. They were low income. And so it was a very rocky childhood for her. And one of the things that caused a lot of trauma in her life was how she was interacted with by members at most of the public schools that she attended. Most of her school stories from being a child have to do with being called. It was when corporal punishment was still a thing. She would get called up in front of the classroom and like hit with a pad.
Oh boy.
All of that, not so great stuff. So my mom had a horrible experience in the public school system. My dad went to Lutheran private school all the way through his K through 12 education. So he had, the more, I guess, I don't know, he had the fancier version of, and so I don't think that my dad would have ever considered homeschooling on his own. It was something that was my mom's idea because she just very adamantly did not want her children to have the same experience that she had, understandably so. And so she was like, "Hey, hon, I think we should not send them to school. I want to homeschool them." And my dad was like, "Okay," and so that's what they did. And my dad has worked, and my mom has stayed home and homeschooled, and it hasn't been the easiest thing for them to do financially, but I appreciate it very much. But personally, as someone who wants to homeschool my kids in the future, the reason that I would homeschool is because I really enjoy my siblings. Okay, like my siblings, the youngest is 8. I have 6 of them, like 3 brothers, 3 sisters. And I really enjoy coming alongside of them and watching them grow as people and watching them learn. And one of the things that my mom has said over the years and that I've heard from other homeschooling moms is just how they feel like they're missing out on so much with their kids. And I'm like, can you imagine how much more you would have that feeling if they weren't with you as much as they already are? Like, how are you? What do you mean you're missing out on their lives? They're here with you. But yeah, so I really want to be super involved with my kids, and I feel like if you are confident in the fact that you can homeschool them, that is a great way to do it because you're living life with them, you're solidifying yourself as somebody that they can come to with anything, and you guys figure things out together, and in the ideal situation, of course.
Yeah.
And you know, and then from a Christianity standpoint, I think that here in the US, I mean, you can send your children to a Christian school. However, I am also a little bit of a rebellious person, and I don't like a lot of the strictness and the double standards that play out in Christian schools. So I wouldn't really want to send my kids there because I feel like all the wrong rules are focused on, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm really interested. What are the wrong? Because I don't know anything about like Christian schools, so I don't know like what is wrong with them in your opinion? What can be wrong?
I guess it plays very much into like it's either like one of two things in my opinion. You either send your kid to a Christian school where they don't really always uphold Christian values, and so you're really not getting the Christian education, like it is more of a secular education, or you send your kid to a Christian school and they're very strict on everything. And like I'll just okay, there was a story that I heard from somebody where when they were younger, they went to a Christian private school, and there was a girl that got pregnant in high school, and the girl was kicked out of school. Who got the girl pregnant? It was a boy at the Christian school. But because the boy is not showing a pregnancy belly, the boy can stay in Christian school and the girl can't.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that is.
So I consider my faith a very big part of my life, but I think that religion is what can be very destructive to people's faith. And so I just don't want to put my children in a situation where they're ridiculed for something because of religious factors when, it could damage their faith. I don't want them to experience that. So I wouldn't personally put my kids in a Christian school. I don't know.
Okay.
Any other type of religious school either, to be clear.
Yeah, sure. It makes sense. So now I'm interested. Like, so Christianity. What is your kind of beliefs or views on that? It's a broad topic, but like, how do your views differ from a common Christians? I guess is we'll start there. Are there any ways that you kind of feel? Because you feel like it feels like you are slightly less strict.
Well, okay, my mom has put it like this before, politically conservative, socially liberal. I wouldn't necessarily describe myself like that, but that's how she's kind of described certain things, is like, there's a difference between what you believe and how you live your life and how you treat others who live opposite you, I guess, is kind of my viewpoint of it. As far as how my beliefs differ from, Christianity as a whole, I'm still figuring that out because, I grew up in the church, and I think for a lot of people who grow up in the church, it kind of goes either one of two ways. You either are just fully on board the time and you just continue to, whatever. And then the other side of things is you hit a point at some time in your life where you start struggling with everything that you've been taught. And I hit that point back in high school. So I don't know if I'll hit that point again, but I hit that point back in high school, and I do feel like I'm kind of past it. But I guess I was definitely somebody who grew up in the church and believed what I believed because it made sense to me. And then when I hit high school, there was this big question for me of, my family was low income. I was struggling with a lot of things because of that. And, people in my life were dealing with mental health issues, and I was watching that unfold. And there were just a lot of things that were pushing me to question, like where are you, God? Like, I've been believing all this stuff my whole life, and I believe that you listen to me, and I believe that if I pray you hear me, and now I'm seeing all of this happen, and I'm asking you over and over again to do something about it, and you're not doing anything. Where are you? And so I hit that point where I was just struggling really bad with all these questions and this anger, because it didn't make sense to me that if he could do something, like, why is he not doing something for me when I've been, so good, this whole time? Like, not like perfect, obviously, because that's not possible, but I'm like, I've been believing in you. It's like I haven't gone around dissing you to everybody, like, help. um and so, and then I think I found my way back to a place of like less anger and less frustration, and a little more lenience in that aspect. But now I feel like I'm at a point where I am like, some of the questions that you have asked on some of your previous podcast episodes to other people, like I hear some of your questions, and I'm like, yeah, what does the Bible say about that? What, I'm digging into it for myself. I'm actually reading the Bible for the first time as an adult, and like digging into what I actually think about certain things. So like, I might say a few things on this podcast if we get into certain things that I might have a completely different viewpoint in 2 years, because at that point maybe I've actually figured out what the Bible actually says, and I've come to a conclusion of sorts. But so I'm just in a phase where like I believe in God. I believe that he created me. I believe that he has a plan. Um, and I acknowledge him as such. And I'm just trying to find out what is biblical. That is my journey right now, is I am actually reading the Bible and trying to find out what is biblical and in what context. So that's where I'm at. And I feel like a lot of people who are in the church have not hit that point in their life. So there are a lot of things that are said, or advice that is given, or things that are recommended that aren't biblical. And it's like, okay, well, if it's not from the Bible, where did you get it? So I'm at a point where I'm like kind of like separating out what has been said my entire life and what the Bible actually says and what I think. So it's not that I necessarily am like, oh, well, I don't agree with a lot of what the church says. I'm figuring it out.
Okay. So one thing I want to then ask you about, because I love trying to like dig into the logic of this, because I feel like it's very like, in my mind, it's very clean, but like I feel like a lot of religious ideologies, because of they have the story of like everything being created, have a hard time like justifying it, is evolution. So I want to like, do you think all the animals were kind of like created exactly as they are? Like, do you think that like how do you think that happened?
I believe in the Genesis narrative of, God spoke and he created things, and I think that those things have either died and become extinct, or they still exist today, depending on the being, the creature. Clearly, he made us, from my viewpoint, and we still exist today. I don't really buy the whole, evolution perspective, but at the same time, I don't expect people who are not believers in God to believe that God created everything. Because if you don't believe in God, why would you believe that he created everything? So I think the natural, you know, result of that, if you don't believe in God, you don't believe that he created everything, obviously. So what is the most logical conclusion that we have? Evolution. So I can see why people believe it. I just personally don't, because I think that if I'm going to believe in God and I'm going to believe in like why I should be reverent to him, then he created me and I need to believe that he created everything else.
Yeah. So, sure, but that's just a justification of, like, you need to believe it in order to uphold the faith, which requires you to believe it. But, like, I feel like, because, like, the premise of evolution, I feel like, is fairly sound, because, like, obviously, genes dictate, like, how an animal, like a human, is built, right? Like, two taller people are going to have a taller child. And that's how, and we kind of understand that, right? Like, do you agree with that premise?
Yeah.
And then we have that, like, some differences in people, like maybe tall people or tall animals or whatever, help them survive better. So, like, giraffes having taller necks can reach food easier or something. So the ones that have shorter necks, in a time when there's not much food on shorter things, might die off. So then we have tall giraffes, right? Do you understand? Then that premise makes sense, right?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
So yeah, so now, so I'm trying to figure out where the, like, because, like, okay, so we have that. So over, like, an extended period of time, then these tiny changes build up. So you have a slightly taller animal, then then you get, like, a giraffe or something. And so I'm having trouble understanding why you reject the idea of evolution. Like, why is it that everything just happened to be exactly the way it is, when we can clearly see that it's changing? We can clearly see that these things happen. Like, even on, like, small scales, we can see it with, like, some fish and stuff, where, like, in lake ecosystems, as they change, the fish rapidly change with it. So I'm wondering, like, where I'm trying to figure out where, for you, the, like, thing ends of, like, is it just, yeah, like,
I guess, okay, one of my questions would be, okay, to preface this, I have sat through, like, creation science seminars and stuff, but it's been a long time. That was all, like, back as a kid, and so I either, you know, paid attention or didn't pay attention, but I don't remember any of it. So there are people who will debate creation science versus evolution and all of because I'm not trying to convince people who don't believe in God that creation is what they should believe in. I don't really keep up with all of the creation science. Yeah. But my question, I guess, would be, okay, like, in evolution, the theory is that apes, like, we descended from apes, right? Like,
yeah, apes, similar, like, ape-like things, yes.
Yeah, we evolved from something like that. My question is, why is that one creation the only thing that evolved to be human? Like, why is that the only group that evolved to be able to speak in the way that we speak and think in the way that we think and come up with theories like evolution and all of those things? Like, how come the fish aren't proposing why and how we were all created? Like, I don't know. Yeah, it's just a question.
Yeah, I think that's, and I think my idea around that, as also someone who's not super well versed in everything surrounding, is I think that it's just a kind of, like, exponential graph type thing of, like, humans just slowly evolved bigger brains to, like, help them with a bunch of other stuff, and consciousness and, like, all this other stuff are almost like runaway side effects of the initial just trying to outsmart other creatures to get food better. And slowly, as we develop, like, social structures and stuff, the brain needed to become more complex, and eventually we kind of got to this point. But the point we're at, where we're, like, super smart and we can build, like, societies and stuff, I think from an evolutionary point of view, is, like, the tiniest microscopic, like, point in the entire evolutionary thing. So like everything happened in like a very small point and then shot upwards, is the thing. So like given enough time, it's possible that like some fish or like dolphins or something might evolve into a thing that has a slightly more complex language, or maybe crows or something could do something like that. I think it's just that it's such a small time frame. Like in this instance, because of how the brains evolved, it like had a kind of runaway effect of like creating everything else.
Okay. Now, I don't, like I said, I don't keep up with the science and everything. Do you keep up with, or like, if you say like you believe in evolution, right? So, does that include the Big Bang, or not so much anymore? I don't know.
So yeah, not necessarily. So it does include it, I suppose. Of like that's the, but it's less of a like the big. The Big Bang is a symptom of the universe being created, and we don't know what caused the Big Bang. We have no idea about that. We don't have any science that can like explain that or go deep enough into that. But we have obviously evidence we can see like from the way everything's moving and like the ripples and the various like, I'm not an astrophysicist or whatever, but like the science of like how stuff is moving to see that kind of like ripples in a pond, I guess. And you say, okay, well, we can kind of see where it came from. And according to as much we can glean here on Earth, looking out at the sky, there seems to be at some point in the distant past where everything kind of originated from and kind of exploded outwards, essentially. Why it happened, though, is a mystery.
Now, and I know I'm like asking you questions, and it's but what do you think about because I know that there are Christians who do believe in evolution. So I just wonder, like, what do you think about the idea that those Christians tend to have, which is that, okay, well, God caused this to, exist, and then all the stuff, followed, the evolution that followed happened.
So what I think of that is that it's I think with a big problem that I have with the entire like Christian religion and everything is that it's very human centric. It's like everything was created for us, and these tiny little humans on this tiny little planet here who happen to like who we can kind of see an evolutionary path from other creatures who are very similar to us and stuff, and we can like, and so this Big Bang was created by this like human god. So I think that's. It feels to me almost like kind of trying to like, I don't know, shove in the religion anywhere, but I feel like I have the same issues with a lot of the religious stuff of where it feels very much like a human-centric interpretation of something. Like, it feels very much like a god humans created of saying like, yeah, we're the best people and like there's a deity just for us. When I don't think that we're necessarily that special. Is.
Oh well, here's one thing from your earlier question that I might divert from a lot of Christians on, is in my recent questioning and such, of like, okay, well, why does this happen? Why does God let this happen if he can control things? Okay, whatever. I've come to the point where I feel like I'm starting to realize that Christianity is pitched very human-centric, and I don't believe that, we're supposed to be this focused on ourselves. I don't think that God made just, because, okay, from my perspective, okay, God made angels. We have angels that we know about from the Bible, and then there's humans, and there's debates about whether or not the Bible actually is referencing other supernatural creatures. But a lot of the things that people say, like, to explain, like, I feel like a lot of people have the question of, okay, this girl got shot in the head and murdered at 18. Okay, yeah. That happened recently in Nashville. A lot of people will have the question of, okay, well, if God has a purpose and God has a plan, then was his purpose and plan for her to get shot and die? at such a young age before she could even really continue her life and live out her life and all this stuff? Was that his plan? What was the purpose in that? And I'm just kind of trying to, wrap my head around that question myself. But now that I'm looking at a less human-centric perspective, I'm kind of like, not everything revolves around us. I'm like, in fact, I'm not saying that God doesn't care about us, but I'm just like, what makes us think that we are like the number one priority out of his creation? He made the angels before he made us. And for all we know, he's made other creations before us and after us and all this stuff. So like, what makes us think that we are the special ones and that every little thing that occurs on earth and in our lives is directly about us and directly about what God is going to do for us and what God is going to do in our life and what God is going to do with the earth? Like, I'm like, it could just be, from a theological perspective, I'm like, it could just be that God and, say, Satan are up there having an argument, and there's some things that need to be proved back and forth, and we're just the fallout, because sometimes we're not the center of the universe. I don't know. That was just a thought that I've been having recently, and yeah.
Yeah, like humans being almost like a byproduct of like a minor conversation that much powerful deities had, and then like we're here like we're the most important things in the universe. Yay us.
I'm like, something bad happened in my life. It must be because God hates me specifically. It couldn't be for any other reason. And it's like...
Yeah, that's interesting. And so, like, do you think it's possible that, like, maybe the Bible and other religious things are, like, they're, like, human-centric interpretations of where they are more religious, of, like... human-centric interpretations of things rather than like literal truth, I guess, is like, do you think like there's a very human spin almost of like, what do you think about that? Like,
I don't know exactly, like, I guess I would say that the narrative that we put on the Bible, that other religions put on their holy texts, I think that the narrative that we put on it is very human-centric. And as I'm kind of reading through, and I haven't even made it nearly close to, I'm actually like trying to understand what I'm reading, so it's going to take me a hot minute to make it through the whole Bible. But so I can't, really talk on everything that's in there. But like I've been actually like reading things, and I'm just like, there's not necessarily anything in, let's say I've been reading Job, the book of Job. It's actually very interesting and very like poetic, I guess, in the way that it's written. It's kind of cool, but from a literature perspective. There's my former English student in me. But yeah, so I'm reading it and I'm like looking at it, I'm like, you could, like, a lot of people do come away with, in their sermons and in their teachings about the book of Job, a very human-centric message. But you can also look at it and come away with a not human-centric message, which is what I'm currently getting out of the book. So I think it's all in, like, how people interpret it. It's like, if I go into reading the Bible looking for the historical context of everything, then I'm going to have an entirely different focus, an entirely different analysis, an entirely different understanding of what I just read, versus if I'm somebody who's struggling with insecurity or some sort of, like, internal battle, and I'm looking for something to relate to, and I read the whole Bible looking for things to relate to, and my analysis of what's in there and my takeaways are going to be entirely different. So I don't know how we, like, kind of put those things into perspective, but
yeah, it's hard because I feel like since it's like written by humans, and it's necessarily, even if there was like truth to it, it's gone through like a human filter to actually get to on text or any paper and stuff. But that's kind of, I don't know why I'm saying, I feel like I've ran off on a little tangent here because I don't know how this relates to
I did too. We got a little bit diluted on the topic or subject matter, but whatever. Hey, no, it's interesting, but yeah.
Yeah, okay, well, whatever, let's loop back then to your cool podcast, Subtle Rampage. tell me what made you make a podcast. Why did you do that?
Okay, so I growing up, I mean, I grew up high school, everything, middle school, I mean, watching YouTube, I am part of Gen Z. We are the generation that grew up with like these mediums of entertainment that our parents didn't necessarily grow up with. So, but like I was very solidified in the fact that I would never put myself out there like that because it just wasn't my personality. I was like I was like, and to this day, I still don't think it really matches my personality to like be on Instagram Reels or TikTok, like, doing a lot of that type of stuff because it feels very disingenuous for me to be doing that because I just like have such a like weird relationship with like portraying myself online. But yeah, so it was definitely like a change of perspective that even let put myself out there and put my views out there on the internet like that. But um, I guess it was last year, fall of 2022. I just had this idea because I felt very alone during COVID. We'll start there.
Yeah.
Um, can you imagine that feeling alone during COVID?
Yeah.
It's such a revelational statement, but no, because I had turning 18, graduating high school, I was kind of just then like deciding what I believed politically because I hadn't really picked a side. I hadn't really done that. I was very, back and forth, and I was like, I agree with what these people are saying. I agree with what these people are saying, and I would play devil's advocate to my dad, and it would always be really tense. But it was my doing because I was being tense, uh, because I was struggling with where I belonged. So, um, you know. Luckily, I have a good relationship with my parents, otherwise that might not have gone as well. But as far as feeling alone, I was coming to these belief systems and I was like deciding how I felt about what was going on around me, and I was paying more attention to decisions that were being made by our local ordinances and by the state where we were living, Texas, and like what was in the government. And I was just very frustrated with how things were being handled, but I would go on social media and all I was seeing was people who were disagreeing with me, and but not just disagreeing with me like me and you are probably going to disagree in this conversation, but disagreeing with me like saying that, if you're not wearing a mask right now, like when you go to the grocery store, you are a grandma killer. And like I was like, it was just all very aggressive. And for being in a state where I was coming to my viewpoints, but still learning how I was going to explain my viewpoints, why I believed what I believed, it was just a lot coming right at me. And it made me feel very like isolated and very alone whenever I was like on social media and stuff. And I was like, and looking back, I'm sure I could have, really researched and found some people who, agree with me and whatever. But I wasn't looking for that, I guess. I was just disappointed and felt isolated by what I was seeing. I wasn't necessarily looking for validation. I just expect to feel so like attacked. And so and then in personal life or whatever, a lot of people were staying home, a lot of people weren't really interacting as much. There were some people in my life who I did interact with, my family. My best friend came and lived with us for a few months, stuff like that. But yeah. And so I felt like there was a lot that I didn't get to say because I wasn't around people as much, and I wasn't around people in real life that disagreed with me. And I was like, I feel like I just didn't get to say my piece. And so and then I started going to university, and I was like, I feel like there's a lot of discussion to be had about some of this stuff. And then I started seeing more of what the political commentary on the right is like and what the political commentary on the left is like, because I watch both. when I can, I watch both because I like to know what people are saying. But the reality is that a lot of it is very, very tense and very I learned this new term recently, very much like rage farming,
Oh.
where they're trying to get you like as riled up as they are, so that it pulls more people into the drama, and I was like, I don't want to do that, but I do want to say my piece, and so I was like, and I don't want to do it alone because I'm scared, so so I called my best friend and I was like, you should do a podcast with me. I want to talk and I need to not talk alone. And so we planned all this stuff out for a podcast. And then I kind of noticed, I was like, it kind of seems like she doesn't actually want to do it. And I was like, that's fair. Her personality is more reserved. It's totally understandable. And I was like, if you don't want to do this 100%, I was like, feel free to back out. Like, I don't want to pressure you. I don't want to put us in a position where you don't want to be here. And she was like, okay. She's like, you can do it by yourself if you want to. And I was like, okay, got it. We're good. We're good. And so I put my own spin on what we had worked on, kind of left some of our joint ideas in the dust and figured we could approach it differently at some point. And I made it my own thing. And so now I have a podcast where I bring up political stuff, state politics, a lot of the time. Sometimes it's just cultural things that I approach from a conservative perspective or from a Christian perspective. I try not to be super. I try to take a more nuanced view to things. I know that there are points in things I say where, it probably doesn't come across that way, but I really do try to put a lot of thought in what I'm saying before I say it. But yeah.
With that, since it's more like conservative leaning, I kind of want to know why are you? So you were talking about you were thinking about like one side and the other, and like your viewpoints and stuff. So I want to know like why are you conservative? Like why is that where you ended up?
Well, okay. So when I had not yet like defined my political stances, um, and I didn't really understand I didn't understand where each side kind of stood on some of the stuff, some of the political issues. And so the first thing that I did was I took my little planner and I went to the end where the notes section is, and I just went online and I was like typing, okay, what does the right think about this? What does the left think about this? What do Republican politicians say about this? And what do Democrat politicians say about that? So I was like going through the list and I was just writing down all this stuff, and then I went back through everything I'd written down and I was like, okay, what do I inherently think about this? And then I would write down, okay, this is what I think about this issue. And then I went to the next one. And then by the end, I was like, okay, clearly I line up a little bit more with the political right here in the US. And I think, to be fair, a lot of my initial response to certain issues was very faith-based. But I think that through my time, like kind of getting more familiarized with politics and with government and all of that stuff, I've kind of hit a point. I'm like, it's not really all that faith-based. Some of my opinions are, but like my political stances are not really. Political stances are more along the lines of like okay, my most controversial one is probably like, being being against abortion, and I know it's like technically pro-life, but I feel like the pro-life pro-choice thing is kind of, I don't know if I agree with those terms for it, because it's like there's been debates about like, oh, you're pro-life when it's a baby, when that's not what most people think anyways. A lot of people care about it when it's not a baby, but and then the other side, pro-choice, it's like I think a lot of people will say pro-choice. There's a lot of people who understand what they're saying, but there are a lot of people who say they're pro-choice because they think you should have the right to choose, but they don't. And then you start going, okay, well, do you think abortion at this stage is okay, or what do you think abortion is, or like, and then you really start asking them questions, and they're like, well, now that I think about it, I don't really know if I'm, like, so there are people who know what they're saying when they say those terms, but then there's like all this like, confusion and whatever. So I am against abortion, but for the most part, my political views are more so like how I see things panning out in the culture. Like, you know, I know I'm not going to be right on everything, but if I see a certain like if I see how a certain cultural thing like feminism, if I see how that's playing out, and I think that the way it's playing out doesn't really um, warrant where we're at with it, then I'll have an opinion on that. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah,
I
I
don't
think
know.
so. Yeah, I think it's you're just coming to your own like kind of conclusions about the things, and they kind of naturally align more conservative.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I want to know like, so what do you think maybe about so what do you think the left gets most wrong, or what do you disagree? You already said like obviously abortion is something that you is one of your more like controversial takes. But like, what do you in general like what do you think is not so great about the left that could be improved, or like that you disagree with most?
Um, I think currently one of the things I probably disagree with most is the like how the transgender issue is being approached on that side of things. I don't necessarily agree with how it's being approached by everybody on the right because, like, you know, saying how like
Yes.
everybody on the left approaches this and everybody on the right approaches this is like ridiculous because it's grouping people together and not everybody thinks the same. But, you know, I think that, you know, there's a lot of developmental things that go into becoming like but like before you're an adult, like in 18 even is not even like you're not even really figured out how like I don't know how old you are, but like I'm 21 and I can still look back like a year ago and be like I have grown so much, my mindset has shifted so much, there's so much that I like didn't know when it comes to like, you know, I hadn't experienced this specific type of interaction. I hadn't, you know, learned how to manage this specific emotion yet. Like there's so much that goes into becoming your own person. And I think that, you know, we shouldn't discount the, you know, struggle of somebody who is feeling like they're not in the right body, who is feeling like they're lost, who is feeling very like hurt or confused or, you know, suffering because of, you know, they believe, you know, they believe that they are a girl in a boy's body. Like, I don't think we should discount how they're feeling at all. But I don't think that the right solution to that is to push them into like therapy where they're being affirmed and when they haven't even figured out who they are, like on any other aspect of things. And I certainly don't think that we should be encouraging them to alter their physical body at that point in their life because when you're a child, when you're a teenager, you're at a very vulnerable state in life. You don't know anything even when you feel like you do. And I can't even imagine some of the things that I would have wanted when I was younger. Doing them would have screwed me over so bad. And I feel like so many of our viewpoints and so many of our feelings change within a very short time frame of years. And I don't like seeing when people regret something so aggressive to changing their body like that, you know?
Yeah,
Like it's
I
very
think
sad to me to see somebody who does end up wanting to detransition.
I think that's a very fair concern. Right, I feel like, especially I do notice that a lot on the left of like the trying to really push that idea of like the how you said gender affirming care, and that's kind of part of it of like the idea that like the idea that children know what they want or what they are is a rather insane proposition if you think about it at all. Like if anyone's ever interacted with a child, you know, like I feel like I have a really little sister who regularly tells me she's like a worm or a butterfly and wants to go around being that, and it's like or like children will say that when they grow up they're going to be like a firefighter or whatever. And it's there's so many different, and like when you get older you have so many different like go through maybe you're in an emo phase or stuff. There's so many different things that you're struggling with, and especially when you're going through puberty and stuff, all the different hormones and things that are going through, and that to try to make the claim that like though they don't know any none of the other things they know they think they know they don't, like we don't allow them to like drink or smoke or do a bunch of other things that could be potentially harmful because they can't make these decisions or like consent to having like sex and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But for gender, like no, they absolutely know that one. They absolutely know. That claim seems rather crazy. I actually had a person try to claim to me that the vast majority of children who say they're trans actually are and know what they're talking about, which like is an insane claim because of all those reasons, and also is we have very little actual data on like children and trans issues since it's such a new thing. We just don't have good data, and the very limited data we do have points to the exact opposite of what you'd expect of like most children who think they're something, then they grow up and they're not that thing, and that's not at all what it was. So yeah, I think that having that and like having them make a choice there and then like pushing them in that direction because you made a choice when you were like very little is definitely a place for concern. So with that, what do you think should be the case? Because like, do you think that there are actual trans people? Well, let's start there.
By saying, do you think that there are actual trans people, do you mean like that there are people who genuinely believe that they are a woman, or that there are people who genuinely are a woman in a man's body?
I would say more of genuinely, and when we say are someone in something's body, I think we're talking about brain. So someone who genuinely has like a brain that is has the brain chemistry or makeup or like activates in a male or female way that is completely opposite to the body, right? So like they have a brain that is feminine or whatever, but they are in a body that's male. That would be what I mean by like actually trans, is like the next someone who is that. Do you believe that exists?
I guess I believe that, there are different combinations of, feminine and masculine traits, and that there can be men who are extremely feminine in the way that they think and the way that they function, all of that stuff. As far as like actually like it being the brain and the mind of, the opposite sex than what you present, I don't know if I really buy that. I guess as far as like, I think when we're talking about people who identify as transgender, there are a lot of people who fall into, at least I have not really spent time in any other country except for my own. Yeah. So at least from what I'm seeing in the US, I think that there are certainly a lot of transgender identifying people who fall into the social contagion category. I think there are also a lot of people who it might not have necessarily been just simply social contagion. I think that there are a lot of people who, young people in particular, who are looking for a sense of belonging, who can't find that affirmation of themselves, who can't find who they are, what their identity is. And through, interacting with different communities and stuff, they find that they'll be super accepted in this one, and they kind of fall into that. And then I think that there are people who struggle with this or believe that they are the opposite sex because they've experienced past trauma of some sort. And then I think that there are people who genuinely just believe that they are a woman in the wrong body or a man in the wrong body. But I don't necessarily believe in the idea that they truly are in the wrong body.
Oh, so you don't think it's like possible for like the brain to develop in a more like female way while the body develops in a somewhat more masculine way, or vice versa? Is that what you
I mean, I guess if I were to say that, then that might trample a little bit of the intersex experience. But like, I just think that the body that you're in, if there's something that's going on where it like doesn't correlate, like I don't think that it's really possible for you to have like a woman's mind and be stuck in a different body.
Well, so what I would say to that is like we have much better data for gay men, where we can like look. And so one of the theories about like gay people is that it's a lack of masculinizing like hormones when the fetus is developing. And there's some evidence for this by like boys who are have multiple older male siblings are more likely to be gay, and that's the idea is that because the like the masculinizing part of it is like a foreign like element in the woman, she mounts some amount of a immune response is the theory, and then the more times you're exposed to that, your body mounts a better and better immune response until eventually what might happen is it mounts such a good immune response that there's not enough masculinizing hormone to actually change it, since fetuses are like kind of by default female, and then they need extra like stuff to actually change them into male. And so we see like when doing like actual brain scans that for some gay people their brain like lights up when like interacting with them the same way that a heterosexual female would. And so I think that it's not insane to think that there could be a very small number of cases where this goes so far that there was so little masculinizing hormone that actually got to the brain when it was developing that it does develop in a female way. And they're so far on the like almost like you can imagine a like gay effeminate scale that they are essentially for the purposes of the mind a woman. So I think at least in that case I think that it would be possible that we could say that like it's essentially a feminine mind in a male body.
Okay, I haven't like heard that perspective or like that theory or whatever it is before. So I don't. Did you say that there have been studies done on that yet, or? So there's studies that show that like the brain of like gay people is whatever it reacts like a female brain, and the current prevailing theory of like why like gay men in large part exists is this the theory of that female mounts like an immune response. That's the best idea we have currently, and there's lots of like side evidence for that. One of them is the older sibling thing of like there's the more older siblings, the much higher likelihood of being gay. There's also lots of just other brain anomalies, things like gay people are much more likely to be left-handed than other people. They just show incongruence in the brain when it's developing, because that's what happens. Yeah. So that's So
I'm
is
not
it
an expert, but like
no worries. I don't expect you to be.
I'm referencing science that you don't know of. Yeah, obviously, but yes, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that is interesting, and I wouldn't say a hard no to that like being a possibility if that is something that like when it comes to the transgender aspect, because since you're referencing studies on gay men specifically, I'm assuming there hasn't been a study done yet on trans people that's like given results that make sense, right? Or that you know of.
What are you asking?
I'm just wondering, like, so looking at the studies of gay men and like their brains and all that stuff, okay? Yeah. Looking at that, we can kind of come to a conclusion that there's a possibility that somebody might be trans because of...
we can know their brain kind of like to an extent works like a woman, and so it's not it's not crazy to think that if it generally works like a woman, that they might be uncomfortable in a male body if their mind is working that like that of a female would. And I think that would be a possible premise for the actual existence of trans people, is that just a slightly more extreme version of a slightly gay effeminate person.
Yeah, well, not having like heard this before or whatever, like because like I don't like go talk to. This is the thing I'm appreciating about being able to come on your podcast. Is like I don't get the chance to like talk in depth about this stuff with people who like are on different sides of the internet and different sides of the research
Yeah.
perspective. But no, I think that that would make sense. Like I think that that is a plausible. Um,
Yeah, assuming
that's a
like
plot.
everything I've said is like true and accurate or
Yeah,
whatever, which like
assuming that all
we're
of that is true and accurate, then I would agree that yes, it is possible for trans people to exist. I just like from like a questioning perspective of like wondering about things, I would wonder like if there's, you know, if some point in the future we can do like studies on to figure out like what exactly like what the common factors are, you know, in people who do have that brain scan where it makes sense that th're trans, you know. Like I would just be curious if they did that at some point in the future, you know. But
yeah, yeah, like you mean like what common factors are that affect the people who are like go from being like maybe just like a slightly more like effeminate person who to actually being someone who like is uncomfortable in their body and wants
yeah,
to
like
change it.
where does it cross over, you know? Like
Yeah.
that would be interesting data to have, but yeah, no, I hadn't heard that before. That is very interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So that I feel like that's just like one possible thing of like arguing for like it's possible that some people feel this way, and so there's there's likely some amount, some non-zero percentage where like actually transitioning and giving hormones and stuff makes sense and is a positive good thing and probably the best option we have. I think you're also right in your points that you were mentioning previously, though, that there's a lot of, especially with how like I don't know, I would say like almost mania around it. I think a lot it's becoming an explanatory factor for a lot of other issues.
Hmm.
Because, yeah, a lot of people have like body issues or other problems and don't feel wholly comfortable, and I think that that is sometimes explained via trans things like, oh, you're probably like trans, and that does then kind of have a looping effect of like, oh yeah, maybe I am, and then it
Yeah.
becomes kind of the identity you take on, even if that's not actually
Something that you're actually struggling with. It
yeah,
just
yeah, within
makes
yeah,
yeah.
and that's the problem with most mental illness type
Yeah.
things is that actually self-identifying it is almost impossible. Like it's so because of the way it works on your mind, it's like it you are necessarily in not the correct state to identify it.
I hadn't
um
really thought about it on the self-diagnosis like perspective of things, but that makes perfect sense. I don't know why I've never thought about it like that, but it's like, yeah, you know, we let somebody can self-diagnose themselves with a, you know, severe anxiety or ADHD or, you know, depression of some, you know, type or whatever, and they can be wrong because they're self-identifying, and
yeah,
we've
and
seen,
yeah, that's a very big problem you can yeah with
yeah.
a lot of things, especially with sorry, yeah, I don't know what I was going with this, but yeah, it is a problem, which is why you need actual a doctor to actually help identify who's actually a professional who understands this and can actually more objectively see, is this the actual case of like, do you have like this kind of anxiety or depression or stuff, or is there something else that's going on that's actually the real problem?
Hmm. Well, did you see there what was happening? Oh, it was like how on like TikTok and just social media in general, there was all of a sudden like this just huge amount of like young girls who were dealing with tics. Like
Oh, I
did
I kind of I heard people talking about it, but yeah, that those kinds of yeah
yeah, and how like doctors were coming out and saying like this isn't normal for the female presentation of oh, now I can't remember the name of what is the, you know, disease that's normally associated with.
yeah ticks. I don't know. There's OCD is something that people talk about a lot, but I have no clue if that's ticks or anything. Um,
There's another one and I can't remember the name. I'm sure somebody watching will totally
yeah.
know what we're talking about. But anyways, yeah, like the doctors were coming out and they were like, this is not normal in the female presentation of this specific thing. Like normally we see tics like this in males with this problem. And like they were pretty much saying like it seems like these girls have genuinely developed tics. Like they're not lying about it, but it's like not from having any sort of like it's from seeing these people, these creators online have these tics. And I just
Yeah.
thought that was so crazy. I'm like, how it's just so
Yeah,
insane.
humans are really crazy like that. I know there was a study you might have heard of about like people with lisps, where they like, for some, it wasn't a very ethical study, but for some like children, they that all spoke normally, they insisted that they had a lisp. They constantly like shouted at them about having lisp, like, oh, you're or like stutters, I think it was. Sorry, not lisp, stutters. And he was
Okay.
like, "Oh, you're stuttering again." And those children, a large amount of them, develop lifelong stutters because of that, like, experiment, right? So like they didn't have it before, but being told they had it and constantly pointing out made them start having it, and then they became people who stutter. So it
That's
was,
insane.
yeah, I know. So it is that it is an issue with humans, I guess. Part of like our ability to like empathize and like actually think complicated thoughts and stuff makes us susceptible to like just like,
Taking it on. Like
yeah, yeah, the malleableness of our minds does have some downsides.
yeah.
um okay, so what about on the right, what problems do you see on the right? Like what are some issues you find with that side of things?
Well, okay, so like one of one of the ones that I've like put a lot of thought to like recently, it's been kind of like a topic between me and like some of my, young counterparts who also have my similar viewpoints, like something that I've been hearing in the young Republicans and young conservatives like circles and stuff. And I actually brought this particular issue up when I went and talked to a group of older conservatives, like back in May, because I was like, hey, you said you wanted to hear about how to grow and engage us young people, so here it is. But one of the problems I see kind of on the right is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the left, um, they they involve young people. I
Yeah,
feel like I look at how young people are involved in the movements on the left, and I'm like, they're the focus. I feel like for older people on the left, I feel like the older people on the left recognize that in order to continue like their movement past when they die, they kind of need to pass on, the belief systems and the knowledge and, the way that they've done things, whether it worked or not, like all this stuff. I feel like there's a little bit more understanding of that on the left from what I've seen versus on the right. Me and a lot of people I know, like I even did a whole survey on it with as many Republicans that were my age that I could kind of get it out to. But I was like, I feel like the older generations on the right are very not wanting to come alongside of us younger people. There are plenty of them who do. Like, don't get
yeah,
me wrong, this is not to generalize the whole generation, the whole movement, or anything like that. But I just feel like a lot of younger people on the right are kind of like left to flail and figure out on their own what they can do for the movement. I feel like if I all of a like, tomorrow decided that I wanted to fight for the left, if I in America, if I wanted to do something to further the left and their agenda, and like versus the right and their agenda, like I feel like if I just went to, some social justice organization or something like that, like they would immediately give me like some sort of to-do list, like things that I could do, like, tangible things that I could do to move the movement forward. And I feel like on the right, that's not really given to us as much. There are, of course, groups that are directed towards younger people like TPUSA and Charlie Kirk and stuff like that. I mean, I know that they really try to involve young people. There's young Republicans groups at some colleges. I know that there are things directed at us, but speaking as somebody who has never been in an area or at a college where those things are occurring, um, I just like, there's been so many points where I'm like, I feel like I'm flailing here. Can somebody who is supposed to be upholding the side of the movement tell me what to I can do? Like, I don't know.
okay, yeah, yeah, I mean, I definitely think that, yeah, the left is much better at involving young people. I think it's probably slightly because I think on average younger people are slightly more like liberal, and
Mm,
as people get older they just become slightly more conservative just by the nature of how people, I guess, go through life maybe.
yeah.
So I think there's probably a little bit more just like at the base level engagement, and like it's almost always necessarily like a slightly younger people's um, movement. But
Yeah.
yeah, that makes sense. Um, is there
And I
any?
don't oh,
Sorry,
go ahead.
no, please go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I don't know if like part of the reason that it kind of feels like this on the right is because of is because it's like more of like a consequence of how the right approaches politics in general. Like, at least in the US, I feel like, until the last few years, at least, the right was very inactive and like passive, as far as like policies and like how they interacted with colleagues, and like it was like it was all about like, okay, well, we want this, but the left wants this. How can we compromise? Okay, cool, we got the compromise. Like, it was not so I think it's like kind of a consequence of like, for a long time it's not like the right is really like fighting for a cause, I guess. Like, it's more so, here's our cause. Hi, nice to meet you. And then the left is like, here's our cause, we're fighting for it. And then like the right's just like not really been fighting until recent years. And so like I don't know if that's why like we don't have like some sort of like system to like teach people or like show people how they can support their own beliefs. But yeah, so I don't know if that's why, but what were you gonna say? I
I
don't
was
know.
gonna wonder if there was any like things you differed like ideologically of like any like generally like conservative like viewpoints or stuff that you have like almost the opposite, like maybe you have a more like liberal viewpoint on whatever this specific issue is or something. Is there anything like that that you can think of?
Uh, the first thing that comes to mind is um like programs like food stamps, um, programs like, Medicaid, state insurance, for low income people. And, part of that is because of my experience growing up and being low income. So I, I have a different perspective. I have different life experiences than, other people do. And so I don't expect everybody on the right to, like, all of a sudden, because one person on the right is like, hey, it's not the worst thing in the world to help people out in this aspect of things. Like, I don't expect them to all come behind me just because I agree with them on everything else. But that is one place where I differ, and I like a while back, I think beginning of this year, I did a episode on my podcast about food stamps because I think it was Iowa was trying to pass a bill that was going to make it like more restricted. I think they were trying to make it probably either as restrictive as Tennessee's program currently is, or they were trying to make it more restrictive. I can't remember. But I was just talking about it and talking about, the things that people had to say about it up there. And I got a little bit of backlash, and I didn't even have that big of a platform. So I just think it's crazy how tense people get over that. But yeah, I think that there are things like that where I definitely um, I understand the qualms that people on the right bring up about it. Like, I understand that there's a lot of fraud in the United States, supplemental nutritional assistance program. Like, I understand that there's a lot of fraud that goes on behind the scenes with all of that. But I don't think that we need to take such a aggressive stance on it when we know that there are people who really need something like that.
Yeah.
Um, and we should know, if we're paying any attention, that just because we tell the churches they should be taking care of this with food banks and stuff, it doesn't mean that the churches will take care of this with food banks and stuff. Like, just because you tell people that they should be able to rely on their communities for things doesn't mean they can just automatically rely on their communities for things.
Yeah.
So I do differ on stuff like that, where I'm like, I've seen the other side of things, and I know how much this helps people, even though there is a lot of fraud. I wouldn't be against some sort of reform, but I also think that the government, if they were really concerned about the fraud, if they really were concerned about it, they could do something about it, but they haven't. And I think part of it is just to like keep people like up in arms about like and divided about it because
Mhm. I feel like it's also the thing of like, well, it's how much like how much is are you losing to fraud versus how much it would cost to like try to like further scrutiny of all these things to actually prevent it. Whereas like if someone's willing to go through the effort of committing fraud to get like extra food stamps, like are they like is it that big of an issue that you want to like I guess like put extra resources to crunching it down, even if they technically don't qualify.
mhm.
It's kind of like if you're the kind of person who's willing to like go that you're probably not in a position that's like especially like great anyway. So it's
Yeah, and that's what I think a lot of people who haven't been in those types of situations don't realize is like it's a hit to your pride. It takes a lot to be willing to say, yeah, you know what, I guess I am gonna apply for this thing that a lot of people look down for. It takes a lot of like, it's a big hit to your pride to show up at a food bank, especially one that's in your community and go, show face with these people and say, I need help. Like it's not like this easy thing like I think a lot of people think it is. It's, there are going to be people who, are like mooching off the system. There are people who mooch off every system that we've ever come up with.
yeah
But I think the vast majority of people actually would prefer to not be on food stamps or would prefer to be able to pay for their own insurance, their own doctor's visits. I'm sorry, the dental care that state insurance paid for when I was in high school probably screwed up my teeth more than it helped my teeth. I'm still like, that's literally on my list is like saving up for like actually good dental care right now because of what I experienced in like the the healthcare system that was under that insurance. So I'm just kind of like sitting there, I'm like, you really don't like if these people could, they wouldn't be using this stuff, I feel like, for the
yeah
most of the people that are using it.
yeah that makes sense. Um, let's go into COVID and vaccines and stuff.
Boy.
You have some interesting opinions there. Um, so can you give me your like broad just like view of it?
I can attempt.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know. When you sent me over the list of topics that we might discuss for today, and I saw COVID, like I had like a little mini like oh like heart attack. But if for no other reason than it's like I feel like so emotionally drained by the topic of COVID, but and I do every time I talk about it, but like I've talked about it on my podcast alone and with somebody else, and so like there's no reason for us to not have this conversation. Like that's not what I'm saying at all.
Yeah.
But like I feel like it's just hard for me to talk about like emotionally, and it's like my body has this like response to talking about it. It's not like me saying, "Oh, I really don't want to talk about it." It's like my body just like, ugh. But I know that it's not just me. I know that there are people on multiple sides of the argument about things that like feel like, their life was kind of screwed with, in some sense. Um, like I've seen that trend, uh, or I don't know if it's a trend, but like people online, like girls online going, I'm a 23-year-old teenage girl because I missed out on 2 years of my life, so I'm still stuck in the same headspace. I'm living life as a teenage girl. And I'm like, okay, that's one way to look at it. But um, I guess to kind of try to summarize my viewpoints on COVID, um, yes, I believe that COVID is real. To get that out there.
Yeah,
And I don't believe that the response that I witnessed here in the US was necessary. And I think that if you look at the numbers now and look back at how things were handled and how things actually went, it really was not justified. I understand, like, in the beginning of things that we didn't know what we were dealing with, but at some point, it did become less of we don't know what we're dealing with and more of, um, we know that the COVID death numbers look like this, but we're going to tell you that more people are actually dying. And then we're going to tell you to go look at the CDC where it says that what we're telling you right now is wrong. And like it's just like I don't know, it's like psychological like warfare was like screwing with my head. I'm like, what is happening right now? None of this makes sense. I'm hearing all these different things, and then everybody's telling me to go to the CDC, and I go to the CDC, and what I'm seeing does not line up with what you're telling me. So I just think that there was a lot of unnecessary policies and unnecessary mandates put in place, especially for I don't know how Canada works. Were you in Canada during COVID?
Was I in Canada? Yeah, I think I was. I was in Canada during COVID.
Okay. Yeah, so like I don't know how things were necessarily in Canada. I don't know how things were in other countries. I just know what I experienced, and I just know what, the US government is supposed to do and what the Constitution says and what the president is technically allowed to do and what the president as a position has kind of grabbed from the other branches, what they're not technically supposed to do, but what they do anyway, and the same for governors. And just looking at the whole, how everything played out is just very frustrating for me. And I don't know. I think that a lot of things just didn't line up quite right, and nobody was willing to acknowledge it. And instead of having conversations,
Yeah.
I don't think I was really allowed to speak without being called a murderer.
Yeah, that was a problem. There was a lot of kind of almost like attachment to the idea of like anyone who points out that there might be overreach is like a terrible person kind of thing. And trying to like put people into like the two camps of like either you think everything is like a super hoax made up kind of crazy thing, or you want everything to be super locked down and a kind of extreme protectionism type thing. I do think that was an issue. But yeah, that makes sense. I feel like there's the overreach is definitely something that's a very fair criticism of it. And I assume there was probably instances where it was probably not justified, depending on what it. But I feel like it's also really hard to say exactly what was justified or not, because to an extent you did it, and so I feel like I'm not sure exactly what numbers we're looking at. I haven't delved super into it. I haven't had the interest, but I feel like they might also be confounded because like if you are doing the measures, then everything's going to look a lot better than if you weren't doing it. So if we didn't do the things we did, then it might be a different story of like why didn't we do it, or a much bleaker outlook. But yeah, I definitely think that there was, especially in the like news and media, people had were much more afraid of like COVID than they had reason to be, given how the actual deadliness of the virus, especially for anyone who was younger.
Yeah, it was like, people with comorbidities and like older populations were really the ones that were impacted by this. But instead, we were masking 4-year-olds to go to church and to go to kindergarten, and it just I don't know, it just doesn't sit right with me. Like I understand that in the beginning of things, like I said, we didn't know what we were doing. We were just trying to prevent death. We were trying to make sure that there was not a horrible impact of this, virus that we did not understand. But at some point, you start to understand it, and you just don't need to be doing these things. I feel like I was gonna say something. Oh, like with the masks. Like the efficacy of masks is just not there. Like it's not there in the way that justifies mandating it for all ages except for like what, under the age of 2 or whatever it is, to go everywhere for everything. It just like literally I understand that like the N95 masks, okay, those are gonna do a little bit of something.
Yeah.
You would hope. They're kind
Yeah.
of made for that. But the majority of people were not wearing N95 masks. The majority of people were wearing the little disposable, paper masks, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people were wearing cloth masks that they hadn't washed in 2 weeks. Um, I literally witnessed one of my friends pick up a mask off of the floor of her car. There's like dog hair all over it, and like she's just shaking it out to walk into the gas station. I'm like, this is okay. But like the little boxes of the paper masks, I'm like they literally like said for like at least maybe not every single brand, but I'm like there were definitely boxes that I saw, okay, like in my place of work. I was working in fast food in the beginning of COVID. I'm like, we have this box of disposable masks that somebody in our team bought because the company didn't buy them for us, even though we're required to wear them. Somebody in our team bought to be nice so that nobody else would have to go buy them.
Mm.
And the box literally says, not effective for COVID-19, not effective for viruses. Like, and I'm just like, can we not? And then the cloth masks, those like vary in how they fit your face and stuff, but those are just not, they're just not effective like in the way that
Interesting.
we were pitching them to be effective. And so it's just frustrating to me that like all I had to do to get on a plane was wear some sort of face covering. I put on the thinnest bandana to go on this plane and they let me on the plane. That is not an effective covering for a virus.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it
I
just
wonder.
didn't line up.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't know the I don't know how to what extent it reduces brain, because you'd imagine that it has to do something, right? Like if you're like sneezing or coughing, then some amount of those particles will get caught in the mask theoretically. But like, but I don't know to what percent it is actually
Yeah,
beneficial.
I can't get I probably
And
could
like,
have like before getting on with you,
yeah,
but
I could have also that's the same for me. I could have looked it up. But yeah, I guess I don't know. Because I suppose I did have the assumption that like mask probably did a bit of something, right? Like
mm,
because it just feels like it does, right? Like if you sneeze
oh
or you
yeah,
cough, like it feels like there's something blocking it. But
yeah.
but yeah, I guess I have no clue the actual efficacy of wearing masks. I don't know.
Yeah,
I imagine they do non-zero amount of something, but I have no clue the actual amount that they do.
I think it is a non-zero amount, but yeah, so it's not a not the masks do have at least a little bit of effect on keeping things in and out and whatever. But when it comes to a virus, like purportedly like the COVID-19 and like viruses in general, but COVID-19 specifically is so small that it gets in and it gets out. Like it, even if you have it like an N95 like this on your face the way it's supposed to be, there's still gonna be like the virus is so small that the particles are still gonna, you know,
Yeah, so
and
it's still.
yeah, and I'm not gonna say for sure because I'm not the end all be all on this. Uh, I feel like I feel like I've read something or heard somebody say something along the lines of like the N95s will prevent a lot, but I think the N95s are the mask that is like somewhat impactful.
Yeah, yeah,
The stuff that most people were wearing was kind of a
yeah,
not really doing anything. It made
yeah.
people feel like they were doing something, but it didn't really do much.
Yeah. I guess it depends on how dangerous the pandemic was in the first place. But I guess
Hmm.
if like even if they do only a small amount of something, it might be merited because like if you have like a even a tiny fraction of like reducing the chance of spread from one person, but then you multiply that over all the people, right? Like you have a bunch of like gates, then that might help on like a larger societal level, I guess. If you're actually dealing with like because I think at one point in the pandemic we were having problems with like hospitalization just because it was spreading so fast that like they were having troubles actually like taking care of all the people who were having some amount of symptoms. So I guess
Well, and we didn't know what we were dealing with, so we didn't know how to treat it. So
yeah.
people, didn't really know what to do at home. If it did affect them worse because they have comorbidities, or it did affect them worse because, they, are more prone to getting sick. If it did affect them worse because they were older, like they go, "Oh, I'm really not feeling good, and there's this virus going around that is we don't know what's going on. I'm going to go to the hospital," because naturally, when you don't know what to do and you're scared for your health, you go to the ER, you go to your doctor. And so, they feel like they're dying, which is what it felt like for a lot of people when they got COVID really bad. They feel like they're dying, they go to the hospital. The hospital was treating COVID um, wrong in a lot of aspects because, like, at first, because they didn't know what they were doing. They were just guessing. And so a lot of people ended up on respirators before they should have been on respirators, and it didn't give their body the chance to recover because something else was breathing for them. And there were just some things like, I think, what is it called? Um, I think proning has been proven to be effective when people are in like a really bad state of COVID, where they kind of rotate the bed upside down. And people, it's to drain the lungs because,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
yeah. So like I don't remember what else they do it for, but like that's already a medical practice, is like they make sure you're secure in the bed, and then every certain amount of time they kind of move you, and it helps your lungs drain because they're not draining themselves or something like that, or your
Yeah. Yeah.
sinuses, or like, yeah. So like there are things that they've figured out that actually do work. We just didn't know what they were, and so the hospitalization numbers were scary. And yeah, and so it's like it's fair how people came to conclusions. It's just, I don't know. I feel like it went on a little too long. And I
Okay.
understand why it did, because once things are chaotic and crazy and there's mixed messaging and everybody's talking and nobody's listening, like I understand how it got to the point where it lasted so long. But,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
and I can also feel like again, there's concerns of how much like government or overreach you want on people.
hmm
And to that end, I want to ask you about the vaccine.
hmm
I want to know your opinions on that because we've talked about the lockdowns in mass, and the vaccine is the pin in this story. Um,
Yeah, so now when it comes to the vaccine, I pretty much right off the when they started talking about the vaccine, like when Donald Trump was still our president, before the election of 2020 had even happened, before any of that, there was already talk pretty quickly about putting out this vaccine. And Trump was walking around saying, "I'm going to get this vaccine out as quickly as possible, and it's going to be the best vaccine ever," and all this stuff, right?
like
Okay.
he does, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I was kind of like immediately skeptical because because of the fact that, one, he was trying to play savior to the whole of everybody. He's like, "I'm gonna get this vaccine out. It's gonna be my vaccine. It's gonna be the best vaccine ever." And then two, because I'm like, a lot of, not everybody, maybe not even the majority, but a lot of people on the right in the US have kind of a questionable, like they question vaccines to begin with.
Yeah, yeah.
There's at least some research done before they decide to get one, right? And so um I was like, okay, so if he's not appealing to his base with this, really. And I was kind of like confused, and I don't know. I just like I was kind of confused on why it was like such a revolutionary thing for him to be the one to get the vaccine out to begin with, but that's besides the point. Anyways, vaccine comes out, even though some of our left-leaning political figures said they would never take the vaccine because Trump made it. As soon as Biden was in office, they took the vaccine. But I'm like sitting there this whole time, and I'm like, okay, but like this is a brand new vaccine that was just put out a couple months ago, that was made within this time frame of months, supposedly, according to the time frame we're being told. So unless they've been preparing it for years in preparation for a COVID-like virus, okay, like they've only had this going on for a few months, and I'm like, for vaccines, there's normally a longer trial period. And so, they emergency use authorized it here in the US, the FDA did. And when it was under emergency use, a lot of people were taking it. A lot of people were, scared. They wanted it to be over. The pitch was, if everybody gets vaccinated, we can stop the spread, or at least slow it down to pretty much
Yeah.
nothing, and then we can go back to normal.
Yeah.
And what happened? We did not go back to normal for a hot minute after the vaccine came out, and they didn't get everybody to take it because it wasn't making sense. Well, like I personally, I did not get the COVID-19 vaccine. I've had my normal vaccines that you're supposed to get, but I did not get the COVID-19 vaccine. I felt like it was a very short time frame. There was nothing to prove to me that it was like going to do anything. And I know there has to be some sort of trial period in there to figure that out. I figured plenty of other people wanted to take it. But having children in the future is something that is incredibly important to me. And, there were concerns about fertility. Nobody could, for sure say this will not impact your fertility. And so, and then they were pushing it, they were pushing it on pregnant women, which was insane to me. There were ads running on social media calling for women who were within a certain like trimester or like whatever to come in and get the COVID-19 vaccine as part of like and get paid as part of like trying to, run data on it. And I was like, we don't. They're not even supposed to drink caffeine. We tell them not to get in a hot tub that's too hot. Like there's so much that we tell pregnant women not to do. And then you're saying, hey, take this emergency use authorized vaccine that we don't even know if it works and we don't know what it'll do to your baby. And we can't tell you if it affects fertility. So we really don't know what it'll do to the baby that's in you, like that you want to have, and there was just so much going on. And I didn't really understand why I was so iffy about the vaccine. I couldn't, if you had asked me, like in the middle of all this, why aren't you taking it? It would have been very much what I just explained, very surface level. Now I've read stuff and I've talked to somebody on my podcast who owns testing clinics and did a lot of COVID testing and has a lot of data on the COVID tests that he brought in. But mRNA vaccines are not the same as the vaccines that you take as a kid as part of your regularly scheduled programming. Okay, like they're not necessarily the kind that offer immunity, like guaranteed immunity or anything like that. And I feel like it was being said this is COVID-19 vaccine, and a lot of people were expecting it to be like the other vaccines that they've taken their entire life. And the reality is that it is a vaccine that was never going to be able to have the same effect. It was never going to be able to make you immune to COVID-19. And it was pitched like it was, and then everybody was shocked when it didn't do that.
Of course.
And so, I don't regret not getting the vaccine, but, I know a lot of people did. I'm not gonna, sit here and be like, I can't believe you did that. It's your body. I just didn't appreciate when our government here in the US decided that to mandate employers, to mandate employees to get a vaccine. Things like that is what I didn't agree with. I'm like, if you want to go get the emergency use authorized vaccine, that is your decision. Don't make me do that. Sorry. I should be able to make that choice on my own without losing my job or losing my schooling.
Yeah, I do feel like that, kind of medical choices like that, there is a fair argument there. I feel like, especially because I feel like the concept of not wanting a government body to mandate that people be injected with things isn't a crazy position to take, right? I feel like that should be the default of the government shouldn't be allowed to inject you with things. That shouldn't be the case. So I feel like that's a pretty, I feel like that should be a pretty easy position to take.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really hard to balance the risk towards other people versus personal autonomy type thing, right? Of how bad is the virus that if you were to go unvaccinated to like a place that you might cause other people to get it, like how bad is that? Because like we don't like say mandate flu vaccines
Mhm.
that come out yearly for people.
Yeah.
So there's obviously some point where we're not going to do that. But I feel like
Well,
there's some point where it is justified. Now, it might not have been justified in this case, but at some point there is a virus that's spreading so fast or so deadly or whatever that it is justifiable that the risk caused to other people could say, okay, well, you need to like do something to prevent this if you can.
yeah. I think in this country, that point should be like way down the line in comparison to where it was placed at in this scenario, um, because of the principles that our country is founded on, because of what is in our Constitution, because of all the things that our politicians purportedly stand for. That point should be way down the line. As far as ethics, um, I think if there was like a much higher death rate, if there was a much higher death rate,
Yeah, yeah.
like then it would make more sense. But I think if there was a much higher death rate, people would see that and they would go, you know what? Like this person is dying and this person is dying, and you know what? This is really serious, and like that more people would have wanted to take the vaccine. And I don't think you would have really needed to mandate people to do it to get 90% of the population to do it if it was a situation that actually warranted it. And
Yeah.
I don't know what that scenario would look like because we haven't had one where it is more serious. So maybe I'm wrong. That is a very possible thing. Uh, but it just I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like yeah, definitely in America, I feel like it definitely feels overreaching. It's very much. I like how free America is, even if it might hurt at some points. Just have that of like, if you don't want it, then like you shouldn't have to have it, and like having even if a kind of like almost an experiment type thing. Because I feel like that's a position that a lot of like conservative people occupy in these kind of things very nicely, of being like a more skeptical like nature of not taking in case there are kind of if in case we can't foresee the future well, and there are like say like you were talking about serious like fertility issues with the vaccine that only appear far later down the line, and then we
Mhm.
realize way later like, oh, we shouldn't have done this everywhere. And so I think that's not just with like COVID, but just like in general, that's a really nice niche that like a lot of um, where conservatives occupy, of like the um, in case all the changes we want to make aren't so good, like having a
Um,
fallback plan almost.
yeah, like I just want to wait and I want to see like but yeah. I don't know.
Um, oh, here's before we start wrapping up, here's
Okay.
something I was thinking of earlier and I just remembered. So what would you say or what ideas do you have for improving the left? Like what would you like to see kind of changed or whatever? Like where do you think the best places for improvement are? Um,
Yeah. That's actually something that I haven't given much thought to, but I probably should, honestly. Just to like be more constructive in my criticism. Um, yeah, no, I think one thing that could be improved that I think is also something that needs to be improved on the right. I actually brought it up in yesterday's podcast episode that I put out, but it's just like it's more of a human problem, but in politics it's very you know, magnified, I guess, is the problem of like seeing somebody and like making assumptions about them, or seeing or reading or just learning the information that somebody else is on the opposite side of the political spectrum and then making all sorts of assumptions about them or claims about them. Like people on the right do it to people on the left, people on the left do it to people on the right. And I just think across the board, I'm like, I could look at somebody and like know that they're a liberal because I so they just told me they're a liberal, And for me, that doesn't create some sort of knee-jerk reaction to like make all sorts of assumptions about them. Like that's just not how I function. Like I guess my life experiences have just not led me to function like that. Um, and I just wish that more people would attempt a little bit of nuance in that because I feel like people are so quick, especially online on internet culture, to realize that somebody disagrees with them and then go personally attack or attack their viewpoints, not knowing what their actual viewpoints are. Because as we've displayed throughout this conversation, like, we're on different sides technically, but there are some things that we differ on, not just for each other, but like from people on our sides. So like, we're all individuals, and I just wish that there was um, a little bit more understanding of that. For as understanding as our generation tries to be, I feel like we could do a lot more, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Ah,
But I can't really think of any like specific, like the left should do this. That's
yeah.
something that I would definitely have to take some time like looking at and thinking about. I'm sure I could come up with something, but yeah, no. I don't really have a direct answer to that.
Oh, yeah, well, that's good enough answer, I think. So moving away from politics, then I want to know just a little bit about you. Like, what other besides political things? Because you write for like conservative like newspaper, you do a political podcast. Like, besides the political, what other like hobbies or like interests and stuff do you have?
It's a little bit of a hard one because I literally, when like our state legislature is in session, I watch the legislature for fun. But it's a little bit of a hard question, no. But I when it comes to like my free time and like other hobbies or anything, like I don't know, I consider my podcast kind of my hobby, my like the main one that takes up a lot of my time. Other than that, I like to journal. I do like I have a normal journal where I like it's like my diary, and I go in there and I'm like, "Dear diary, this is how terrible my day was." I find that that's very good to get my emotions processed. Um, and then I keep a bullet journal as well because those are just fun and cute to look at, and it helps me keep track of my days. Uh, and then I just spend a lot of time with my family because I've moved out a couple of times for various ventures, and but my family is always very much like, "We miss you. Like, feel free to come back." Like, so I am like currently back home with my family, and I really enjoy spending time with my siblings. I really enjoy spending time with my parents, and I try to do as much of that as I possibly can, because these are the people I'm stuck with for the rest of my life, and I already like them, so I might as well build those relationships. And then my friends, I live a little bit more rural, so they're a little bit of a drive away or several states away, depending on the person. But I do spend a lot of time talking to people on FaceTime and all of that stuff. My best friend and I, she's in Florida, so we will be on FaceTime for like 10 hours, like having deep conversations, and then 5 seconds later like one of us is washing the dishes and the other one's like taking a nap, so like I find ways to fill my time, but it's a lot of quality time with other people. Yeah.
Um, then I'll ask you the final question that I try to remember to ask people, though don't always do it. If you could change one little thing, either about kind of the world or just about your like personal life or things, that's small, like just changing one dial just a tiny little bit, just shifting one thing just a little bit, what would you change about either the world or other people or your life or like that?
Something small.
Yeah, it's just a very minor incremental, nothing huge, just
I don't know. I mean, I feel like where I'm at right now, like geographically, um there's not a lot of young people. Is like, there's not like groups or anything. Like it's really hard to meet people, and I know that's kind of across the board. A lot of people struggle with that, but I would like to be able to meet some more people like out in real life. That's probably like I tend not to think about things that I want to change in my life, but that's probably one that I would see as a, you know I don't necessarily feel like super alone or anything, but I wouldn't mind being in a spot where I can meet some more people organically.
Yeah, being with other people is always really nice.
Yeah.
Having that kind of community.
Yeah.
Well, it was very nice talking with you. I think we can probably wrap it up here. So I want to thank you for coming on out to the podcast and like sharing all of this stuff about yourself.
Yeah, thank you for having me and for having a very nice conversation from where I'm sitting. I appreciate I appreciate you platforming me. And I look forward to hopefully having you on Subtle Rampage podcast. That would be
I
wonderful.
would love to.
Learn more about Jethro.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess we're gonna end it there.
Sounds good.